Welcome to the Trust Factor Radio, bringing you interviews and insights to unlock the power of the subconscious mind to create authority, credibility, and trust. With your host, the Authority Architect and best-selling author, Neil Howe.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Neil Howe, and today my guest is Margie Warrell. She's had an international career in business, psychology, and coaching with clients with the likes of NASA, Google, and Berkshire Hathaway. She's lived and worked all over the world. She swam with piranhas in the Amazon and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with her kids. She is a best-selling author of multiple books and is here today to talk about her latest book, You've Got This, The Life-Changing Power of Trusting Yourself. Welcome, Margie Warrell.
Hey, great to be with you.
Well, thanks for joining me. I'm really excited to hear just some of the things that you have done in your life. I've read through your bio and your book, and the stories really are amazing. I wondered how somebody can do all these things in your life. Obviously, you've not let anything hold you back, but we're going to get into that and your book, You've Got This. But give us a little bit of a background into, what you do and how you got started with that.
Yes. Well, I probably have a very non-linear route to arriving where I am today, but I actually grew up on a small dairy farm in rural Australia, and 7 kids in the family. My dad milked cows for 50 years. My mum had been a nun actually before she left the convent, met my dad, and had our 7 kids, Francis Patrick, and I'm Margaret Mary. So I had actually, my childhood was in many ways pretty simple. We never traveled very far. There wasn't very much money. It was very much organic, I guess pretty down-to-earth sort of childhood, just growing up on a farm, riding horses and what have you. But then when I turned 18, no one in my family had ever gone to college, but I decided I really wanted to explore. I knew there was more world out there to be explored. So I moved 4 hours away to Melbourne and went to university. And there was no sort of college residential living or anything. It was just find somewhere to live and go to classes in the day. And it was definitely a step outside my comfort zone. But that sort of started a trajectory of me just really approaching life with a sense of adventure. And it hasn't stopped since. It's taken me in all sorts of interesting places and many interesting experiences. But I guess it's how I came to write this book, You've Got This, because in my own life, I've had to defy my own self-doubts many times. And I've certainly been outside my comfort zone many times, but along the way, I've come to realize how so often we as human beings, we sell ourselves short and we doubt ourselves too much, and we're actually capable of so much more than we often give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, it's stereotypical maybe of Australians that they like to get out there and adventure and travel the world. Much like the Scots as well. You see a Scottish person everywhere that you go, but not everybody in the rest of the world is like that, especially here in the United States. Most people, stay put and their world is here. What was it that really made you want to get out and travel?
Yeah, look, I mean, I will say this. Yes, Australians do tend to travel for longer periods because we're so far from the rest of the world. But, my own father, he didn't have a passport until he came to visit me when he was 60 and I was living in Papua New Guinea. So I think I've had an opportunity to travel that maybe generations past didn't. And I still travel a lot, probably less of it's, hardcore adventure, but I do a lot of flying around the world now. In fact, I think I've been to the United States. Well, I'm living in Singapore at the moment, and I know I've flown across the world at least 3 times this year, probably with another 4 or 5 to come. And I think ultimately the more I explored of the world, the more I realised that actually the world's a smaller place than we think it is. And while things can seem like they're a long way away, if you just it's often in our heads, it's in our psychology, things can seem so far, but actually if you just get on with it, it's not as far as you think. It's so much of it is in our own minds, in our own thinking. And so, but that's only one aspect, I think, of my work in my life, and so much of it. I mean, I have 4 children, four fantastic, wonderful children, and I know even daring to have the 4th child for me was a real act of courage. It was about having faith in myself that I could manage raising 4 kids, being a good mum to 4 kids with my husband, and also pursuing work that was calling to me outside of the home as well. And yes, it's a juggling act, and it has been and continues to be, but I think often we are capable of doing more than we think, and we often think we can't, and we scare ourselves. We go, oh, that just sounds so hard and so scary. But actually, if we just sort of roll up our sleeves and get on with it, it's not as often, the things we think are scary are not as scary once we actually do them. I mean, as I think Nelson Mandela said, everything is difficult until you've done it. And then you go, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.
Right. So it's, the actual doing and taking action that is holding people back from getting things accomplished.
Yeah, I wrote a Forbes column about this recently, about how often many people say they'd like to have more confidence or they'd like to feel braver. And I believe that if we wait until we feel brave and we've got all the confidence we want, we can spend a lot of our lives waiting. And actually, the way that you can build the confidence and the self-belief and the bravery that you wished you had is actually by taking action amid your fears and doubts and misgivings, not waiting till they're gone, but doing those things that you wished you had the courage to do. And I know for me, it's not been the absence of self-doubt. I still have a voice that pipes up in my head on a regular basis that says, when are people going to realize you don't know as much as they think, or you're not as deserving of the accolades, or, all of that stuff that comes up for me a lot. But I know I'm not alone in that. And I think what I've got better at, and it's why I've written this book, is I've got better at not letting the doubts and the fears and the misgivings sit in the driver's seat, and embracing that discomfort, embracing that vulnerability, and saying, you know what, I'm going to give myself permission to not be brilliant at this. I'm going to give myself permission to learn as I go. I'm going to give myself permission to be imperfect and to make mistakes as I move along. And when we give ourselves permission to figure it out as we move forward and to not nail it first time every time, we learn a lot more. We build more competencies, we build more confidence, and we actually expand our capacity for bigger things.
Really, but what you've talked about are extremely scary to the majority of people trying to get out there and do things like you've been able to do. What really made the difference between you deciding, okay, this is something that I'm just going to do, and the people that are still sitting on the couch wishing that they'd done after things that
I think there are a couple of things. One is the embracing of the discomfort. It's like going to the gym. If you want to get muscles or get fit, learn to run a marathon, you're never going to do that by just running as far as feels comfortable or lifting as many weights as is easy. You do it by lifting weights that are stretching you, and maybe you'll be a bit sore. But then if you keep doing it and going back to the gym, a week from now, you won't be as sore lifting the same weights. And a month from now, you'll be able to lift bigger weights. And it's the same sort of concept that courage is like a muscle. It's a psychological muscle. And the more we practice it, the more we embrace doing things that are uncomfortable, the more comfortable we get with those things. And actually, the things that were once scary don't become scary. For instance, public speaking is a great one. The first time I ever got up to speak, I was actually living in Dallas, Texas, and I had 4 young children, and I really wanted to build a coaching business. And I didn't know anyone. I'd moved to the US just after 9/11 with my husband, had a job opportunity there. And I remember kind of being terrified of getting up to speak. And the first time I spoke, 2 people came along. But now I speak regularly, and I have spoken probably, not that I've counted, probably thousands of times in the last 16 or so years since I started speaking. And so now, yes, I still feel a little bit nervous, but now I've built up skill and I've built up competency and confidence to speak in front of 5,000 people, which, you know, if you'd put me in front of 5,000 people 16 years ago, I would have just frozen. And so to anyone listening, I would say, you know, don't start with trying to climb Mount Everest. You know, if you're trying to get fit, you know, just say, okay, I'm going to go around the block today. But if there's, maybe pick up the phone and invite somebody out for coffee. Just start with something small. I think that's one really important thing. But the second is, get really present to the price that you're paying in your one and only sacred and precious life by not doing the things that you truly want to do. You know, there's so much research that's been done on people at the end of their lives, and the biggest regret people have is that they haven't lived the lives that they knew they could have lived, that they have played it too safe, that they've settled too fast and too often, that they've let their fears of what people might say, or of being rejected, or of feeling foolish, of making a mistake, they've let the fears of what could go wrong keep them from taking action. And, you know, I think a lot of us, we have a fear of what will people say, or what if I try this and I make a fool of myself? And to anyone listening, I would say, you know, when you're doing that, you're essentially giving away your power. You're saying, I care more about what someone else thinks or how I might be perceived by other people than actually what I think and what I want to do. And so it's so important to get present to the price that we pay by sticking inside our comfort zone, by sticking with situations that don't light us up or just leave us with this sort of lingering sense of, you know, it's fine, but we're not really living our lives to the full. We're not really thriving.
Right. And, you know, to kind of date this interview, we're talking right in the middle of this coronavirus, which is spreading fear all across the globe right now. Why are so many people like scared of something? When you look at the facts and the figures and the reality of things, you know, not too many people are, you know, getting sick and dying from this than other things that are out there, like the flu or other viruses. Why do you think the fear is so great right now? And, you know, how does that relate to, you know, a general fear of not taking action and following your dreams?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So I do a lot of travel, and I've been flying around. I spoke to someone today. She said, have you changed your travel schedule because of coronavirus? And I said, no, I haven't. I was in the United States last week. Then I went to Australia. Now I'm in Singapore. I'm back to Australia next week. And then I'm back to the US in a couple of weeks. And she said, but aren't you worried? And I said, look, I'm mindful that if flights are changed or events are cancelled, I will have to adjust my plans. But I'm not fearful and worried about getting coronavirus. In fact, my brother-in-law, my sister actually works for WHO, and he said, I just want to get it and get over and done with. And I think it's the uncertainty that creates so much anxiety. In Australia last week, I know in the US, I have 2 kids in New York, you know, like I've heard, you know, the shelves have been emptied of toilet paper. You know, why people go out and stock up on toilet paper is still sort of confounds me, to be honest. But here's what happens. The more often we focus on what scares us, we get pulled into what's called fear casting, where we get pulled into worst case scenarios and catastrophizing worst case outcomes. And that emotion of fear, the more often we have any emotion, the more it sets up residence in us. So I had someone message me today saying, I really appreciated your article that you wrote, because he said, I've been watching way too many horror movies, and so this coronavirus has really got me feeling almost crippled by anxiety. And so someone who's always watching horror movies is always kind of scaring themselves a little bit. And then something bad happens and then they're really terrified. And so I would just say to anyone who's feeling anxious at the moment is get offline if everything online you're reading is making you anxious. Don't get stuck in conversations with people who are stressed out, because their stress becomes your own. Get on with doing whatever makes you feel stronger. Get on with doing whatever makes you feel better about yourself, that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose in your life. Because the best thing we can do for ourselves in the midst of this current epidemic or pandemic, whatever we want to call it, is actually to really build up our own system, so that if we do catch the bug, that we're actually our bodies are going to fight it off, and fight it off well, which I'm very confident mine would. And I think so often stressing about getting sick, stressing about the things we don't want to happen, actually puts us at more risk of the very things we don't want to happen. Mm-hmm. So we've got to be so careful about where we're putting our focus. And that's why in my book, You've Got This, I talk a lot about how do we conquer self-doubt, and how do we build self-trust? How do we live our lives from a place of whatever happens, I've got this. Whatever happens, I'll be okay. And, I know for me, I've lost quite a bit of income actually because of coronavirus, because events have been cancelled. I do a lot of speaking and people are cancelling conferences. And so I don't get paid, or I certainly don't get paid as much. Maybe I get a deposit or something. And, I could go, oh my gosh, I've lost income, and how am I going to, you know what? I know I'll be okay. I'll adjust what I'm spending, and we'll get through this. And so I think for anyone who's feeling anxious, just if you were operating from a place of faith, I've got everything it takes inside me to figure this out one day at a time. How would that relieve your anxiety and actually clear your thinking so that you can make smarter decisions and take better actions and actually set yourself up to come out the other side of it, not stressed out and with an ulcer, but actually having found the opportunities with it and even more emboldened in yourself.
Mm. Yeah, a lot of what we talk about in this program is trust. This is a business audience, and I feel that people don't really make buying decisions until they trust you. But really, you're not going to make any decision until you trust yourself, right?
Well, and I think that's where, I have some quotes. I have wonderful quotes in my book, but self-trust, when we trust in ourselves fully, when we trust in our innate capacity, in our power, in our potential, it actually liberates and transforms our lives. And I know for me, having dared to trust myself numerous times over the years, when I'm like, have I got what it takes to go backpacking on my own? Have I got what it takes to move to a new city at 18 or whatever? That's built up lots of little deposits into my own self-trust account. Even my ability to discern who to trust in relationships. I'm sure there's no one on the planet that's never placed trust in a relationship with someone that wasn't worthy of the trust. But we learn who to trust sometimes by trusting the wrong people. And we build up that discernment on who to trust and who not to trust. And trust sits on a spectrum from blind trust at one end of the spectrum to complete mistrust on the other, where people don't trust anyone with anything. And that's a really crippling, isolating way to live. I don't trust anyone. Everyone's going to, take you for a ride if you let them. That's a really lonely place to live from. Mind you, on the other end, I trust, where we blindly trust it like a child with an adult, where they trust without being discerning. That can be a really dangerous place to live from. And I think it's about learning to be discerning. And it's the same with ourselves, learning to know, there's some things that maybe are outside of my realm. I don't trust me to fly a plane. I don't have the competency for that. But to trust our innate capacity to deal with the challenges that life brings our way, to be able to cope with even the emotions that life brings our way, it's a very empowering place to live from, because then it frees us to do more of whatever it is that inspires us, versus thinking, I'd really like to do this, or I'd really like to change that, but I'm scared I'll be alone, or I'm scared I won't have what it takes, or I'm scared people won't like me. in which case we're really held hostage to fear.
Well, talking about inspiration, some of the things that you've done are really inspiring. Swimming with piranhas in the Amazon and climbing Mount Kilimanjaro with your kids. I'm sure that was just a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it was extremely hard. I won't say it was a walk in the park. It was actually really tough. But, my third son, Ben, when he came up with the idea, he said, we were thinking of going to Africa on a safari. And he said, wouldn't it be cool to climb Mount Kilimanjaro? And I was like, Ben, it's pretty high, And at that stage, we were actually living at sea level in Melbourne. I enjoy going for walks, but we weren't exactly, hiking at altitude ever. But he made us kind of think this is a good idea. Let's take this on as a family. What a fun thing to do. And actually, in hindsight, particularly when we got up that mountain, we realized actually we were being more ambitious than really perhaps we had the right to be. We weren't a family. We weren't overly prepared for it. We didn't do some grueling training, regime to get ourselves prepared. But we were really committed to trying to get to the top as a family if we could. And it was hard. I mean, it was, for me physically, it was really grueling on that summit day, the day that we really got to the top. But we actually all made it. One very, very slow step at a time. With the steps got a lot slower as we climbed higher into that African sky. But, my youngest was 13 at the time, and he was throwing up at one point. I was throwing up at one point as the altitude really kicked in. And it took us 9 hours, just very slowly, from the base camp, which is, I think the base camp's at about 18,000 feet, to get to the summit, which sits at about, I think about 20,000. But, we did it. And it was an incredible sense of accomplishment, not that we could celebrate really until about 3 or 4 days later because we were wiped out. We were so exhausted from doing it. But if anything, I know for my children, it taught them, you can do more than you think you can. And it's only when we dare to do more than we've done before that actually we discover, what, we have capacity for bigger things than we often give ourselves credit for.
Well, what an amazing experience. And like you said, your family learned a lot of lessons, but there's, I'm sure, numerous business lessons that have come from that. Talk to me about the business side of what you do for other companies. I know you've worked with multiple Fortune 500 companies. How have you got on their radar, and what do you do for them?
Yeah, I've got on their radar by working really, really hard. I absolutely have not just got, I haven't got lucky. I've worked really hard, and I think, and a lot of it's been organic. I actually am not particularly strong at sales. It's often just recommendations. Someone sees you and then they tell someone else and they tell someone else. And so, this has been over the course of 16 or so years since I started up my first. At the beginning, it was a coaching business in Dallas, Texas, and then I moved to Virginia, and then back to Melbourne, and now I'm in Singapore, but I'm planning to move back to the United States this summer, actually. But I share that with you that it was hard work because, I put myself out there a lot. I'd get invited to a networking event. I'd get invited to a dinner party. I'd follow up. I'd meet someone for a coffee. I'd go and meet someone at their company and talk about what I do, and they'd say, "How can you come in and run a free program?" In the beginning, I did things, the very early days, I did things for either low fee or very little fee or no fee. And then over time, word of mouth spreads and you build a reputation. And so yes, whether with NASA or Google, when many organizations, so often it was someone recommending me to someone else, and then it built from there. And of course now, if anyone wants to go over to my website, margiewarrell.com, now I have a lot of, testimonials and videos and everything else. But yeah, I tend to do a lot of speaking at conferences and a lot of facilitating programs, so half day, full days, and sometimes full weekend programs, which I really love. Particularly, I do a lot with women, and I really enjoy the weekends that I run with women too.
So what kind of stuff do you talk about then, Margie, with these big companies that you're talking NASA, Google.
Yeah,
what
yeah.
kind of problems are they having?
Well, you know what? What's interesting is that so often the problems they have are very similar, across whether it's tech, it's finance, it's healthcare, it's oil, energy. It's human behavior. And yes, industries can have different specific challenges in their industries and professions, but it's human behavior that often where we get in our own way. So fear of having difficult conversations, that's a huge piece of what I do, is around helping people have the difficult conversations, helping people to take smart risks, to put themselves out there, to speak up in meetings, to challenge old ways of thinking, to experiment with new ideas, to embolden the people around them and bring out the best in others. And so, the umbrella of it all is I talk around it being leadership, but I really believe all leadership begins with self-leadership. And so how can we lead ourselves and make positive changes ourselves? And then in doing that, bring out the best of others. But it's also about resilience. How do we be more resilient in the face of our challenges and thrive under pressure? And so I think, a lot of the times we want to avoid problems and avoid pressure. But actually the problems aren't the problem and the pressure's not the problem. It's how we deal with it. It's the mindset we bring. It's the daily rituals that we practice. And I wrote a lot about that in You've Got This. What are the little things you can do every day for yourself? Things that I treat absolutely sacredly in my life that allow us to then bring our best selves to our challenges and to the challenging people around us and actually to every aspect of our lives.
Well, I love the breakdown that you have in your book with not the chapters, but the different sections that you have. The daring that you talked about, building that confidence and dealing with the doubts and understanding that it is fear that is holding a lot of people back and making that next step. And then the growing and then the becoming. Talk to me about, just those three things briefly.
Yeah, well, the book is divided into those sections. The first section, the daring, is really about, it is exactly that, daring to do more than feels comfortable, daring to do more than feels safe, daring to take action in the presence of our doubts and our fears. And so that's that whole section starts with, act with the confidence you wished you had. Don't wait for confidence. The section on growing is about when we're out there and we're doing these things, how can we embrace our own humanity? How can we get off our own back? How can we be, what is it that we can do for ourselves that helps us to grow more, to build our muscles up for life? And, part of that is to trust in our strengths and talents. I believe every single one of us is uniquely gifted to make our own unique mark in the world. And so often we get in our own way by not trusting in our own talents. And so that's that section on growing. And the section on becoming is really relevant to what we're dealing with right now with coronavirus. How do we stay grounded in ourselves amidst uncertainty? How do we choose the path of faith over the path of fear when our plans fall apart, when things aren't the way we want them to be? And I've had, as I share in the book, quite a few significant and difficult experiences personally in my life, whether it's family tragedies, my own personal tragedies, whether it's just massive disruption through my husband's work and career and our family being scattered across the globe, and which was not what we planned, and how to deal with that. That section is how do we take all of those challenges and channel them in such a way that we become more of the person we were born to be, more wholehearted, more compassionate, and more grounded in ourselves. And so that's the three sections kind of over, giving you the big bird's eye view of it all, that I really hope will help people around the world who are struggling to believe in themselves as much as they'd like, who are doubting themselves, and who are wishing that, they felt more confidence and more power within themselves to really step into that power and to make the changes and to show up as the person that deep down they know they have it within them to be.
Well, like you said at the start, we only have one life to live, and it is precious. We want to get the most out of it that we possibly can. Reading this book is certainly going to help. You've got this, the life-changing power of trusting yourself. Margie, where can people find the book? Where can they pick it up, and where can they find out more about yourself?
Oh, great. Well, thank you for asking. So obviously the book is available everywhere online. So Amazon, Book Depository, anywhere you buy books online. But you can also go to my website, margiewarrell.com. And the book page is just / then YGT for You've Got This. And I have a whole lot of, at the moment, give it people who purchase the book before the end of March. I actually have some pre-order incentives to thank people for doing so. But they can download the manifesto. I have a special manifesto people can download on that book web page, margiewarrell.com / YGT.
Well, excellent. This has been a fascinating conversation. Obviously, there's lots of fears that hold people back. Reading the book is really going to help them just see that these fears can be overcome. So I do encourage everybody to go out and get You've Got This, because you do have it. And, you just need to take that action to get things done in life. Well, Margie, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for being a guest on the Trust Factor Radio today.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
And to our listening audience, if you like what you hear, hit that like button and share, and we'll see you next time on the show.
You've been listening to the Trust Factor Radio with Neil Howe. To learn about the resources mentioned in the show and to listen to past episodes, go to thetrustfactorradio.com. To get a copy of the book, The Trust Factor, go to thetrustfactorbook.com. If you are ready to act now and build your authority, credibility, and trust, schedule a consultation with Neil at theauthorityarchitect.com.